Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the armchair historian. The invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, or D-Day as it's more commonly known, is one of the most well-documented events of the Second World War. Countless books, movies, and even video games have covered the landings on the Normandy coast in great detail. Yet it can be confusing to figure out exactly how each landing was different, what the German defenses looked like, and what exactly happened once the invasion forces got off the beaches. As such, we'll be zooming out from the chaos on the ground to give you a bird's-eye perspective of the D-Day landings. First, we'll be flying across the American sectors from the chaotic nighttime drop of the airborne all the way to the advance off of Omaha Beach. The invasion of Normandy, codenamed Operation Overlord, commenced in the late hours of June 5, 1944, as an armada of C-47 transport planes carrying the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions made its way toward the Cotentin Peninsula. The elite paratroopers were entrusted with the crucial task of paving the way for the seaborne forces landing at Utah Beach just after dawn. The 101st would secure the causeways between the towns of St. Martin de Verreville and Poupaville, while the 82nd would capture the crossroads at the town of Saint-Mère-Église and secure the vital bridges across the Méride River at Chef du Pont and at La Fère-Menor. However, things go awry almost immediately as thick inland cloud cover and intense ground fire complicated things for the pilots. In the resulting chaos, most paratroopers miss their drop zones entirely, as they are scattered all across the peninsula. Those who land safely nonetheless manage to quickly form makeshift units as they make their way to the nearest objective. In most cases, the confused German defenders are quickly overwhelmed. Saint-Mère-Église becomes the first French town to be liberated at around 4:30 am as men of the 82nd dig in for the expected counterattack at the La Fère-Menor and Chef du Pont bridges to the west. The bulk of the 101st due east, in the meantime, are in the process of clearing the 5 causeways to the landing beach, where the invasion force anchored just offshore is about to make its approach. The fleet's target was a 5-kilometer stretch of flat sandy beach just east of the airborne drop zones, codenamed Utah Beach. On board of the invasion fleet were the men of the 4th Infantry Division. Their objective was to establish a beachhead approximately 5 kilometers wide and 8 kilometers deep, with the ultimate goal to isolate the Cotentin Peninsula and capture the deep water port of Cherbourg. The first step in achieving this objective would be to break through the defensive position of the German 79th Static Infantry Division before advancing inland on the 5 main road exit. Besides flooding the nearby farm fields, the defenders had littered Utah Beach with 3 lines of obstacles, consisting of steel spikes and mined wooden posts, as well as an array of anti-tank obstacles. The Utah sector was covered by 9 resistance nests, or Widerstandsnesten, which were manned by platoon-strength garrisons totaling about 700 troops. At 550, the fleet commences its bombardment of known German positions along the coast. Meanwhile, 270 bombers close in to further soften up the German strong points. However, hindered by poor visibility and anxious not to hit the invasion force, few pilots manage to hit their targets. At 630 hours, the first wave of 20 landing craft carrying part of the 8th Regiment approaches the beach's 2 sectors, Uncle Red and Terror Green. They're supposed to have landed behind a vanguard of amphibious DD, or duplex drive tanks, of the 70th Tank Battalion. The 70th tanks, however, are struggling to advance in the face of heavy headwinds and wade ashore late around 6:45 am. Luckily for the infantry, German resistance is lighter than expected, and besides some small arms fire, most casualties on the beach fall victim to artillery fire and mines. As it turns out, The strong swell that morning pulled the landing craft a mile, or 1.5 kilometers, southward to a sector less well defended than the previously designated landing site. Despite this good fortune, incoming artillery fire covering the various beach exits continues to cause casualties and hamper the advance throughout the early morning hours. A few miles inland, paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division resolve the issue as they conduct a set of daring assaults to silence the German batteries at Oldie and Brecourt Manor. With these guns neutralized, the men of the 4th Infantry Division managed to overrun the remaining German beach defenses, and by 830 hours are ready to begin their advance up the causeway. Around noon, men of the 8th Regiment make contact with elements of the 101st Airborne Division at Poupeville. Further inland at Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, the regiment's 3rd Battalion prepares for a battle, but finds the town already liberated by troopers of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who had cleared it in close quarters fighting earlier that day. The swift and mostly painless advance of the 8th Regiment is finally ordered to a halt at the end of the day at the crossroads at Les Forges, some 10 kilometers inland. Meanwhile, men from the 12th and 22nd Regiments, landing in follow-up waves, move to secure the northern and northwestern flanks of the beachhead until they too penetrate around 10 kilometers into German-held territory. By the end of the day, the Utah operation had been a success. The 4th Infantry Division had achieved nearly all of its objectives, in return for just 197 casualties, a number far lower than had been anticipated. The airborne divisions had suffered more heavily during their chaotic nighttime drop, but they too had managed to achieve the majority of their primary objective. Within 24 hours, the Americans had established a firm beachhead on the Cotentin Peninsula through a mixture of exemplary skill and sheer luck. Some 23,250 men and 17 vehicles were ashore, with countless more to follow in the days, weeks, and months to come. These fortunes, however, would be in short supply for the American forces set to land further east. About 15 kilometers to the east of Utah Beach, a group of 225 elite soldiers from the 2nd Ranger Battalion, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, are headed towards the protruding cliffs of the Pointe du Hoc. The Rangers were entrusted with the daunting task of scaling the 30-meter-high cliffs to prevent its artillery battery from pummeling the American invasion beaches. Once on top, the Americans would have to fight their way through a series of defensive works and obstacles manned by men from the 716th Static Infantry Division in order to reach the gun emplacements. Things don't start out well for Rudder's men on D-Day. His troops are scheduled to land at 6:30, but due to a navigational mishap, they don't reach the beach until 7:10. The alerted Germans greet the Rangers with small arms fire, grenades, and even rocks, as the latter begin making their way up the cliff. By 730 hours, the first exhausted Rangers have made their way to the top to find a moon-like landscape of deep craters created by preliminary bombardment. In a wild and frenzied scene, Rudder's men storm the emplacements only to find that the guns are not there. Fears that their sacrifice had been for nothing are soon alleviated when a patrol finds that the guns are intact in a field just behind the Pointe. With their main objective completed, the remaining Rangers dig in for the inevitable German counterattack and wait to be relieved by the invasion force landing at the neighboring Omaha Beach. The western end of Omaha Beach lay just about 6 kilometers to the east of Pointe du Hoc and stretched all the way from the area around Viraville-sur-Mer to the cliffs near Colleville-sur-Mer, some 8 kilometers to the east. The most prominent characteristic of this wide and mostly sandy beach was a series of bluffs which offered a commanding view over the coastline. 5 natural draws between the bluffs offered the only exits off the beach for vehicles and heavy ordnance. The Germans were well aware of the potential for a landing in the Omaha sector, and had constructed an intricate web of obstacles and resistance nests to cover the approaches to the draws. The beach itself had been littered with obstacles of all kinds. Soldiers disembarking in the shallows would first have to traverse an array of mine stakes and iron frames, as well as hedgehog anti-tank obstacles. Barbed wire covered the seawall and dunes further on, while the draws were blocked off by minefields and concrete walls, as well as remote-controlled flamethrowers. Furthermore, in order for soldiers in most sectors to even reach the draws, they would have to cross the shelf, which was a roughly football field-sized gap of open ground between the seawall and the base of the bluffs. But to even get to that point, the Americans would have to brave a deadly and sophisticated set of resistance nests. Most of these strong points were hidden from sight, camouflaged, and placed at an angle to protect them from enemy fire. The slight curve of the coastline also meant that resistance nests on both the eastern and western edges of the beach could provide interlocking fields of fire across the landing ground. 3 additional resistance nests were positioned behind the bluffs should the invaders manage to break through. In total, the resistance nests in the Omaha sector were composed of 8 big gun emplacements, 35 pillboxes, 18 anti-tank guns, and 85 machine gun nests. Being the largest and the most well-defended of the 2 American beaches, Allied Command had assigned both the 29th Infantry Division as well as the veteran 1st Infantry Division to secure the bluffs by 730 hours, link up with the British forces, advancing from Gold Beach at Port-en-Besson, and securing an overall beachhead 26 kilometers wide and 8 kilometers deep. At 555 hours, the preliminary air and naval bombardment begins, hounding the German positions. But once again, the bomber pilots delay too long and end up missing their target entirely. With the German defenses still intact, the first wave begins to make its approach at 630. Some landing craft are hit as they close in on the beach, and many soldiers are cut down. To make matters worse, almost all of the DD tanks that were supposed to land ahead of the infantry have floundered in the rough channel waters after having been launched far too early at 5 kilometers from the shore. Within minutes, Companies A and F of the 116th Infantry Regiment, landing at Dog Green and Dog Red, are virtually wiped out. However, not every sector of Omaha is as well defended. At Dog White, G Company reaches the base of the beach within 4 minutes of landing, while at Fox Red, at the far eastern end of Omaha, men from the 16th Regiment make use of the cliffs in that sector to shield themselves from enemy fire. At around 8 o'clock, a group of men under command of General Norman Cota in the Dog White sector managed to blow a hole in the barbed wire in the Dog White sector and advance up the steep bluffs to take out WN-70 before moving on to clear the N-70. Fierville Drawl. To the east in the Fox sector, a group of soldiers led by Lieutenant Jimmy W. Monteith similarly managed to fight their way up the exit and take out WN-60. The majority of the troops near the draws are, however, still hopelessly pinned down, and their sectors quickly become congested with the arrival of subsequent waves. To make matters worse, the incoming tide begins to shallow the wounded and the dead, while slowly reducing the size of the beach even further. Sensing catastrophe, a group of us Navy destroyers brave enemy fire as they move in as close as 800 meters from the shoreline. With their direct fire support, 8 German gun emplacements are knocked down, providing enough of an opening for the ground troops to recontinue their advance up the bluffs. With the German defenses now being breached in several sectors, the tide begins to turn in the Americans' favor. The assault teams on the bluffs quickly swing west and east to flank the remaining German positions, while the other groups advance on the towns of Vierville and Colleville-Sumer. By the end of the day, the Americans at Omaha had secured the bluffs, but the advance off the beach had only reached 1.5 kilometers inland. This precarious foothold on the Normandy coast had come at the cost of over 4,000 U.S. casualties. Still, Omaha had been secured, and the Germans lacked the strength to attempt to push the Americans back into the Channel. By nightfall of June 6, 1944, it was clear that the American landings had succeeded. Despite the initial chaos of the U.S. airborne landings, the efforts at Utah Beach had been nothing short of an astounding success. Omaha Beach, on the other hand, had veered dangerously close to catastrophe, yet here too, the Americans had ultimately established a firm foothold that was only to expand in the days and weeks to come. However, relative success in the American sectors did not equate to the success of D-Day as a whole. Arguably the most important of all the landings on June 6 were taking place further to the east, where British forces were attempting to capture the medieval city of Caen and prepare for a clash with the brunt of the German armored reserves. It's just past midnight on June 6, 1944, as a group of gliders descend toward the Norman countryside. Inside are paratroopers of the British 6th Airborne Division. They have been tasked with securing 2 bridges over the Caen Canal and the River Orne on the far east flank of the scheduled Allied landings in Normandy. Within 15 minutes, the assault teams managed to completely overwhelm the small German garrisons guarding the bridges, and dig in as they await the arrival of the rest of the division. The bulk of the 6th Airborne was set to land just east of the River Orne, where they were to destroy 5 bridges over the River Dive and silence the Merville gun battery overlooking Sword Beach. However, in a near replay of the American drop, poor visibility and navigational errors caused the paratroopers to be scattered all across the Norman countryside. Fortunately, the area of operations lacked the thick bocage that would come to haunt the Americans, making it far easier for the paratroopers to swiftly link up in large groups. To the east, designated units set out to destroy the bridges over the Dive River, while a small group of 160 paras out of a planned 600 proceed to assault the heavily defended Merville Battery to the north. The fierceness of the following battle depletes nearly half of the assault team's strength, but by 5:3 a.m., the battery is under British control, opening the way for the invasion force, anchored offshore, to begin making its approach. Stretching about 8 kilometers from the seaside town of Ouistreham to Saint-Ambin-sur-Mer, this beach was to be the eastern flank of Operation Overlord. Sword significance lay in its proximity to the city of Caen, which was a major road hub located just 12 km from the beach. The British 3rd Infantry Division had been ordered to lead the assault on Sword Beach, and if possible, liberate Caen before the end of the day. Secondary objectives were awarded to the elite units of the 1st Special Service Brigade, whose men were ordered to link up with the Canadians landing on Juno Beach, just off to the west, as well as relieve the embattled paratroopers of the 6th Airborne Division to the southeast. Opposing the British invasion force was the German 716th Static Infantry Division. As a first line of defense, its men had littered the beach with minefields and obstacles of all kinds. Beyond that, the Brits would have to brave a series of resistance nests which stretched from the coastline all the way to Caen. The most notable amongst these were 2 formidable inland strongpoints codenamed Morris and Hillman. These veritable fortresses were armed with heavy artillery, anti-tank weaponry, and machine gun emplacements, and were perfectly positioned to block an advance on Caen. However, the Germans' real ace in the hole came in the form of the 21st Panzer Division. Stationed near Caen, their presence in the area presented the defenders' best chance of forcing the British troops back into the Channel. As such, it was imperative for the success of the entire invasion that the 3rd Infantry Division get off the beach as quickly as possible. The citizens of Caen are still recovering from the impact of the preliminary bombardment. When the first wave of landing craft and amphibious duplex drive, or DD tanks, set off toward the shoreline. With most of the German resistance nests still intact, the vanguard of the 3rd Infantry Division faced strong initial opposition. Several landing craft and vehicles are hit upon landing as the infantry struggle to reach the beach exits. In the Roger sector on the easternmost flank, French and British commandos find themselves caught in a bitter struggle around the heavily fortified casino in the town of Ouistreham. Further west, the 4th Special Service Brigade, tasked with linking up with the Canadians at Juno Beach, find themselves similarly pinned down by heavy enemy fire coming from the Cade strongpoint in the town of Lyon-sur-Mer. Fortunately for the brigade, the belated arrival of the sluggish DD tanks and other armored vehicles quickly changes the tide of battle. Sword, however, is still under fire from German positions on the Perrier Ridge just south of Hermontville, as overwhelmed engineer teams frantically try to clear lanes off the increasingly congested beach. Hours pass, but luckily for the British, the expected German counterattack fails to materialize. To the south, the frustrated men of the 21st Panzer Division idle uselessly as they await explicit orders from the Führer to attack the beachhead. The Führer, however, is still soundly asleep as the bulk of the invasion force finally begins moving off the beach. On the eastern flank, the men of the Nobel 4 Commando Unit have managed to clear out Ouistreham, while just to the south, the 1st Special Service Brigade are the first to make contact with the beleaguered paratroopers at the Caen Canal and River Orne bridges. However, in the center, the advance off the beach is quickly reduced to a crawl at the strong points Morris and Hillman. The former falls after about an hour of heavy fighting, but the latter's defenses prove far more formidable than anticipated. Fighting at Hillman continues well into the evening, obstructing any further advances in that area. To make matters worse, at 4 o'clock, the 21st Panzer Division finally arrive on the front line to begin their counterattack. Its tanks strike right in between the British and Canadian lines, but the timely appearance of Allied armor causes heavy casualties on the charging panzers. Despite these losses, the Germans press the attack, and at 7 o'clock, some surviving elements manage to reach the coast. These depleted units, however, lack the strength to exploit their breakthrough and are subsequently ordered to withdraw. Having braved the German counterattack, the 3rd Infantry Division attempt a final dash for Caen. Marching down the Hermonville-Caen road on foot, its men reach as far as Beville-Bouville, a mere 7 kilometers from the Caen city center. However, a lack of sufficient armor support and coordination with the neighboring Canadians forces the infantry to pull back as the day draws to a close. Positioned right in the middle of the Normandy invasion, the Gold Beach sector stretched from Port-en-Besson to the west to Vers-sur-Mer, some 16 kilometers to the east. High cliffs on its western end separated Gold from the neighboring Americans at Omaha Beach, and forced the British to land on a flat stretch of ground between Le Hamel and La Rière. The experienced British 50th Infantry Division had been entrusted to link up with both the American and Canadian beachheads, sever the road and railway to Caen, and capture the city of Bayeux, some 13 kilometers inland. Opposing the 50th Division would be elements of both the German 716th and 352nd Infantry Divisions, including a mobile response unit in the form of Kampfgruppe Meyer. 11 resistance nests, as well as 2 partially completed coastal gun batteries, augmented the defense further, though few were made out of the near-indestructible concrete that characterized the Omaha sector. At 5:30 a.m., the head-pounding roar from Bombarding Force K signals the start of the preliminary naval bombardment. Crucially, 3 of the 4 guns of the Long-sur-Mer coastal gun battery are knocked out by direct hits. The first wave following in the bombardment's wake, however, quickly finds out that the powerful strongpoints at Le Hamel and La Rivière are still very much intact. Within short succession, Several tanks and other vehicles are knocked out as the infantry scurry behind the seawall. Fortunately, a specialized flail tank is quick to react and manages to silence the deadly 88-meter gun at La Riviere before it has a chance to do more damage. Further to the west, in the Jig sector, elements of the 1st Hampshires managed to neutralize the more weakly defended position at the village of Anil before circling inland to attack the strongpoints at La Hamel from the rear. Meanwhile, in the King sector, infantry of the 5th East Yorkshires begin to systematically clear out the fortified houses at La Riviere along the shore, while flail tanks try to clear out lanes for the invasion force to move inland. With the immediate landing zone coming under Allied control, men of the 1st Battalion Hampshire Regiment managed to seize Arromanches while the 47th Royal Marine Commando march on Port-en-Besson to link up with the neighboring American. Back at King, the 6th Green Howards with armor from the Dragoon Guards clear a lane of a beach and move to assault the batteries at Montfleury and Vers-sur-Mer. Joined by the 5th East Yorkshire, they continued to advance down the road before clashing with Kampfgruppe Meyer near the town of Brazenville. Luckily for the British, the battle group was caught by surprise and virtually annihilated during the following engagement. With most of the immediate German resistance neutralized or subdued, the British vanguard managed to link up with the Canadians, but lacked the strength to make the final push to Bayeux before nightfall. By midnight on June 6th, the British invasion force had succeeded in achieving about half of its objectives. At Sword, close to 29,000 men had come ashore at the cost of around 1,000 casualties. The 6th Airborne, on its part, had secured a beachhead on the eastern bank of the Orne while blocking the way for the Germans to reinforce the defense of the beach. Crucially, though, the British had not been able to capture Caen on the first day, a failure that would prove extremely costly for the Allies, as it allowed the Germans time to reinforce their line with several elite panzer divisions. The Norman city would not finally be liberated until July 19. At Gold Beach, around 24,500 men occupied the largest Allied beachhead of the entire invasion. At the relatively merciful cost of 400 casualties, the 50th Infantry Division had shattered the German defensive positions, opposing them, and connected its front with the Canadians at Juno Beach. Although the Brits had failed to contact the Americans and capture Bayeux, they stood poised to liberate the weakly defended city on the following day. Special thanks to the sponsor of today's video, World of Warships, a free-to-play MMO that lets you take to the high seas at the helm of history's greatest naval vessels. First-time and returning players will be excited by the new content being released every month. Whether it's new ships, in-game nations, cosmetics, or even ship classes, enjoy fresh gameplay, experiences, and best-in-class graphics in World of Warships' stunning 12x12 arena, and on more than 40 unique maps with dynamic weather, all of which have been updated with amazing new water effects and textures that make the game seas virtually indistinguishable from the real thing. With multiple ship classes to choose from, conquer the oceans using big-hitting battleships, quick and devastating destroyers, do-it-all cruisers, sneaky submarines, and deadly aircraft carriers. From live streams to tournaments to in-person events, World of Warships has an active and passionate community that you can be part of. Use the link in the description to play World of Warships today on PC or console, and use code WARSHIPS to receive a huge starter pack that includes a haul of doubloons, credits, premium account time, and a free ship. If British casualties on D-Day were less grievous than Allied planners had anticipated, their Canadian comrades were to be less fortunate. We'll take a closer look at the landings on Juno Beach, also known as the Canadian Omaha, stretching around 8 kilometers from Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer in the east to Courcelles-sur-Mer In the west, Juno Beach was situated in between the British sectors of Gold and Sword. Its most significant landmark was the Coppicat Airfield, located some 17 kilometers inland, just to the west of the city of Caen. Allied planners had made it a priority to expand Allied air superiority as soon as possible, and the capture of Coppicat was deemed an important first step to achieve this goal. The Canadian 3rd Infantry Division had been assigned to assault up the beach, seize the airfield, and sever the Paris-Cherbourg railway line. If possible, the 3rd Infantry Division would also support a potential assault on Caen, with British forces advancing from Sword Beach. Like their British comrades in arms, the Canadian invasion force would face units of the German 716th Static Infantry Division, which had positioned themselves in pillboxes and fortified houses in various fishing villages along the coast. The most formidable of these resistance nests were located in Bernier-sur-Mer and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, whose large vacation homes provided the defenders with excellent vantage points over the beach, while skillfully positioned gun emplacements could pick off approaching armor at range. Elsewhere, on-rails machine gun teams had the ability to rapidly reposition their heavy equipment to suppress large sections of the beach. At dawn, the Allied Armada offshore opens fire on the German batteries and strongpoints in the Juno Beach sector, as the men of the Canadian 7th and 8th Brigades ready themselves to open the assault on the beach. At 7:30, the first landing craft set off from their assembly points, but the rough waters of the channel quickly slow the advance to the beach. The Germans, in the meantime, have suffered only minor damage from the opening bombardment, as they prepare themselves to meet the first wave with withering fire. At around 7:5, landing craft, carrying engineer elements of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, are the first to lower their ramps in the Mike sector, near Court-Sault-sur-Mer, while delayed elements of the Queen's Own and Royal Regina Rifles are closing in. Further to the east in the Nan sector, many of the amphibious duplex-drive tanks of the 1st Hussars that were supposed to come ashore alongside the infantry faltered in the channel waters, with only 14 arriving on the beach intact. Lacking adequate armor support, the Winnipeg's men are mercilessly cut down by intense German fire. Further to the west, other elements find the German strongpoints opposing them greatly weakened or already destroyed by the preliminary bombardment. After a brief firefight, the few remaining positions are neutralized as the Canadians begin to advance inland. Further to the east, in the Nan sector, the Regina Rifles similarly managed to silence most of the initial German defenses in front of the Court-Sault-sur-Mer in rapid succession, and by 8 o'clock, its men are already advancing into the town itself. Its abandoned vacation homes, however, provide ample opportunity for the Germans to transform its quaint streets into a veritable killing zone, forcing the Regiments to begin the time-consuming task of clearing out enemy snipers and makeshift strongpoints. Just a few kilometers to the east, the Queen's Own Rifles are facing another type of nightmare in front of Bernier-sur-Mer. Sandbars and other obstacles obstruct the way to the beach, forcing the Queen's Own to wade through deep water before making a near-suicidal dash across 183 meters of beach without armored support. Crossfire from several hidden German emplacements, including an 88mm gun, devastates the struggling infantry. And within a matter of minutes, 65 Canadian soldiers lay dead or wounded on the beach. On the far eastern end of Juno, elements of the North Shore Regiment, landing in front of Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, are faced with a similar predicament as ferocious fire coming from undamaged German positions atop the town's high seawall. Annihilate the regiment supporting tanks within a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, the arrival of reinforcements changes the tide of battle at Bernier-sur-Mer, as decimated men of the Queen's Own manage to overcome the Germans and move into the town. While the infantry are finding ways to move inland, Increasingly agitated tank crews are finding it impossible to traverse the high-curved seawall. As engineers race against time to create makeshift ramps and open other exits off the landing zone, the beach is quickly becoming congested with the incoming tide. In the meantime, advancing Canadian infantry are moving to outflank the last pockets of German resistance. Courceau-Béarnais and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer all fall under Canadian control. By 10 o'clock, the advance southward is ready to begin in earnest. Within an hour, the Québécois regiment stands outside the outskirts of Béarnais-sur-Mer, while follow-up waves equipped with bicycles rush down to catch up with the vanguard. On the western flank, the Canadian, Scottish, and Winnipeg rifles link up in the marshes around Sainte-Croix-sur-Mer, while the Regina Rifles and 1st Hussars advance towards the Riviere. With their line broken, the defenders of the 716th Infantry Division are powerless to withstand the weight of the Canadian advance. With the fall of Béarnais-sur-Mer, the road to Copiquet Airfield and the Paris-Cherbourg railway line now lay wide open. However, just as follow-up units continue to advance southward, the eastern flank is attacked by elements of the 21st Panzer Division. Attempting to push the Allies back into the Channel, the 21st Panzers drive in between the Canadian and British lines toward the sea. The attack, however, fails to dislodge the Allies, and the 3rd Infantry Division recontinue the advance in hopes of reaching their primary objectives before nightfall. Dashing ahead, elements of the 1st Hussars manage to sever the San Bayou Highway, while the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and the Cherbourg Fusiliers fight their way into the towns of Villon, Buisson, and Annecy. With the Canadians now a mere 5 kilometers away from the Copiquet Airfield, its garrison panics and initiates a haphazard evacuation. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the 3rd Infantry Division receive orders to halt the advance and dig in for the night and prepare for another expected German counterattack. By the end of D-Day, the men of the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division had established a beachhead that stretched around 16 kilometers inland, which was further than any of the other beaches on the first day of the invasion. In return for this remarkable feat, its men had suffered serious losses during their initial landings on the beach, which were dwarfed only by the casualties the Americans sustained on Omaha. However, the Canadians had fallen short of their primary objectives. Their failure to capture the Copiquet Airfield in particular would soon prove to have been a costly mistake. By the end of the next day, powerful German reinforcements in the form of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, moved into the area, marking the start of a month-long bitter struggle, which would not end until Copiquet was finally captured on July 9th.